Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. If you don't know my name, I am Father Carl, and it is a joy for me to be able to welcome all of you this evening to McDonough Hall for what will be really a very beautiful, interesting, and reflective evening. We are so happy that you chose to come out tonight. And what a beautiful night God gave us to come out, right? No rain, no snow, and a really beautiful temperature. So once again, welcome. I'm going to invite Rachel from the Sienna Center to come forward and lead us in a beautiful prayer. Rachel?
Thank you, Father Carl. Welcome, everyone. It is a gift to be here at St. Giles, collaborating with Marcy and the wonderful community here. I'm delighted to represent Dominican and the St. Catherine of Siena Center, so thank you for this wonderful collaboration. So just take a moment to center ourselves, and we will begin with a prayer. Loving God, we invite your wisdom over our community tonight. We give thanks for Father John Deere and his prophetic witness to peace and nonviolence. Through his writing, we meet, quote, a Messiah of universal love and total nonviolence, who invites and welcomes everyone into God's reign. He's more generous, more gentle, more welcoming, more healing, more political than we ever imagined. With this shocking realization, we hear good news beyond our wildest dreams. We notice how far we have strayed from his nonviolence and the true God of peace. But more, we see a new horizon of universal love and peace opening for every person, every nation, every creature, beginning today for each and every one of us, end quote. God of peace, open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts so that together we become more loving, more nonviolent, and more aware of our own capacity for peace. In your name we pray. Amen. And now I invite Marcy to introduce our special guest. Thank you all again.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Marcy Mederi. I'm the director of Spirit and Light, which is a Catholic collaborative between the two Oak Park Unified Parishes. So it's, all the grace of what we can do together. Isn't that fantastic? Yeah. So I first experienced Father John decades ago. He was speaking at a national conference, and there was something about him, something genuine, something real, something passionate about him when he spoke about peace that really moved me. I never talked to him, never, had an interaction with him, but he left a mark on me. And so when Mary Schleitweiler came and sent me this email, and Father John said, I wrote a book. Anybody want to come hear about it? I'll come talk. She said, do you think we could pull this off? I said, I think we need to, right? I think we need to do this. So here we are after a bit of planning, and so grateful. And Father John is been doing this peace work for a long, long time. He's worn beautifully by it, right? This work is not easy. This is hard work. So he just, taken and made smooth, made beautiful by having all those edges rubbed off of him, and I'm sure sometimes in some challenging ways. Since we've been doing this, he and I've really just been kind of nasty to him, telling him what to do and being a little snarky, and he just is fantastic. He's so much fun and so much goodness in him. So yes, he has written 40 books. Yes. He is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Yes. He has been in the trenches doing this peace work for so many years, for all of us, to help us and lift us up. But what I really want to say as I introduce him, he's a really good person with a kind heart and a fantastic sense of humor. So I'd like to welcome Father John Deere. Oh, and he said he was a pushy priest, and he's inviting everyone to buy books. And if you've got one, then buy one for someone who can't afford it. And he's even brought his own books, which you can also buy that are not these. So did I do all right? You did great. All right, thank you.
How about a round of applause for Marcy, who made all this possible, as well as Sister Mary. And thank you to Father Carl and everybody at St. Giles. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to see you. My motto is do whatever Marcy says. But it's really nice to be here, and thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm going around the country talking about my new book, and I was at St. Sabina's yesterday, preaching to several million people. I hope it wasn't a total setback for St. Sabina's. As I hope tonight won't be a setback for St. Giles. You're very brave to come. But I'm nervous in front of all you holy Chicago peacemakers. Like the young priest who's giving the first homily, and he's very nervous, and he comes to the podium, he taps on the microphone and says, "Something's wrong with this microphone," and the congregation goes, "And also with you." That's my best joke, and I think I told it here 20 years ago. So I got other bad jokes if you want to hear them. So I think tonight is the day 20. I'm on a 65-city, 5-month speaking tour around the country about Jesus and nonviolence. I speak every day. I'm going to be in San Antonio, Texas tomorrow night, and Austin on Wednesday, and Birmingham, Alabama Thursday, and Biloxi, Mississippi Friday, and Florida for the weekend. That's as far as I know. So I'm happy to be here, and it's exciting. As somebody said to me, well, we know what you did during the pandemic. So, I've been wanting to write this all my life. Well, and I felt called like 15 years ago, but on the other hand, I've been avoiding it. And then the pandemic hit, and I had just moved to California and living in the diocese out there. And I was living in a cabin in Big Sur on the ocean. What could I do? What could I do but just sit there and look at the ocean and write about Jesus all day? Anyway, that's what happened. And so I've been going around the country talking about it. The Gospel of Peace, a commentary on Matthew, Mark, and Luke from the perspective of nonviolence. I wanted to do a 4-volume box set with John, but my publisher said, we're not publishing 1,000 pages by you. Somebody has to stop you. I'm trying to cheer him up, Marcy, and it's not working. So I just want to say thank you all for all that you do for peace and justice and Jesus and God and all the poor and the movements, and just to encourage you to keep at it in these bad times. It's the best thing we can do with our lives. As I get older, it seems the world and the country and the church seem to get worse, but Jesus gets even more spectacular. And I say throw all our chips on him and let's follow him like never before. It's really fantastic. And as you know, so for me, all my life, I've been kind of obsessed with Gandhi and Dr. King because they use this clumsy word that nobody uses, nonviolence. And that they talked about it all day long. I've studied them. And nobody's talking about it now. And originally, 100 years ago, Gandhi would have said, well, it's from the Jains. It means ahimsa, meaning do no harm in thought, word, or deed. Okay. Well, let's look at that for a second. You're never going to hurt another human being ever again for the rest of your life. Okay? You're never going to say another harmful word again for the rest of your life toward another human being. Yes. You're never going to think another harmful thought toward another human being for the rest of your life. How's that going for you, Holy St. Giles people? That's the beginning. Gandhi realized, wait a second, this is a spiritual path. This is a way of life. This is our only hope. Every human being has to practice this. And then he realized it's the politics of God, that when we organize life like it, it's a methodology of social change through bottom-up, grassroots, organized people power movements. And he thought if we could organize this as Jesus taught us, maybe we could get nations to practice active, creative nonviolence together. So he tries to get India to become nonviolent and to get the British Empire to leave nonviolently. Well, you can't do that. He did it. And he changed the world. And he did it because of Jesus. And I just find this spectacular. He said, nonviolence is the highest form of human consciousness. Is that right? Of course he means universal love and truth, but total nonviolence is what we're talking about. So then he comes along and says, Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. It just kills me. It's such a beautiful summation of the life of our guy. And then he goes on 100 years ago, and poor Gandhi says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't seem to know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. Is he right? If he's right, now we're getting somewhere, I always thought. And, but when I look around the world, as you do tonight, it's just insanity. And as I've been here in Chicago and learning about what you all have been up against, racism, gun violence, mass incarceration, poverty, extreme poverty for 5 billion people, to homelessness here. No, permanent warfare, World War III and piecemeal, genocide in Gaza, Ukraine closer to nuclear war than ever, 13,000 nuclear weapons. We're really getting close. The use of catastrophic climate, of fossil fuels, unleashing catastrophic climate change. When I look at all of that, it seems like Christians are all for this. Catholics too. As if, God blesses all of this. God blesses our wars. We don't have to love our enemies. Blessed are the peacemakers. No, blessed are the war makers. That we have some kind of false spirituality of war. That God is a God of war, a God who blesses injustice, who blesses the rich, who blesses the violent. So that's why I've been pondering this for so long and decided, I felt really moved to do this. And if you could stand it, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about Matthew, then Mark, and Luke. And as I said, this from a Gandhian, Kingian hermeneutic of nonviolence. Marcy, I'm trying to impress him, and it's not working. That just is a big highfalutin theology word, meaning perspective. As if Gandhi and Martin Luther King are reading the Gospels and going, see, he's even more nonviolent than us or anybody ever knew. And therefore, if you want to follow this guy, we got to practice total nonviolence. And our whole mission for the rest of our lives is to work, as I said yesterday, for a nonviolent Chicago and a whole new world of nonviolence. Gandhi defined the kingdom of God, he said, is nonviolence. That's his theology. Wow. So is that okay if I walk through some of the Gospels and then Marcy says we can have some time for a rebuttal? And then you can make a quick getaway and you'll feel better later. So as I get it, you all know this as much as I do. We've been studying it all our lives. Matthew is written to the early Jewish Christian community. So Jesus is this, we got the Messiah, only he's not the guy we were hoping for. Because we wanted a guy who was going to overthrow the Romans in a big military war and have a great new modern day Zion through militarism, and this guy's totally nonviolent. It was a big setback. And they frame Jesus as Moses, the new Moses, climbing the mountain, giving the new commandments, the new law. So we have the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, just to talk about it. Gandhi said it's the greatest writings on nonviolence in history. And so he read from it every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life. Did you all know that? He was Hindu, by the way. Did I hear that you all were Christians, or even at St. Giles, you're Catholic, you're reading the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening? Isn't that a shocking? I wonder some days, is he the only person in history who ever did that? And Gandhi wasn't Gandhi. Gandhi started reading this in the early 1900s in South Africa. I actually went to his house in Durban, and I went to India for a month with Gandhi's grandson, who was raised by Gandhi. We went to all the places where Gandhi lived, and we saw the place where he meditated every morning and evening in the ashram near Ahmedabad and read from the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying this is like a handbook on how to be a human being. This is a how-to manual to be nonviolent. I want to be nonviolent. I'm violent like everybody else, so I have to read my manual. And he let the words change his life. So he became Gandhi. And that's what I think Jesus wanted for all of us. And I just find all of this very powerful. You know it, but just to lift it up to you. And as I'm talking, I just invite you to reflect on these teachings and your image of the total nonviolence of Jesus and what you think about that and how that touches you and what that means for you now in this moment of total violence that we've been asked to live through and to go out into. You know, what are we going to do about it? How can we deepen in gospel nonviolence? Well, blessed are the poor in spirit. I think that means we surrender everything to God. From now on, we don't do what we want to do. We surrender our will 100% to God. We belong to God. If you got money and you got guns and you got 13,000 nuclear weapons, you don't need God. You're good to go. If you don't have any money, and you don't have any guns or weapons or bombs, you need God. That's the way it starts. You know, nonviolence requires total dependency on God. Blessed are those who mourn. You know, you could argue, as I heard my friend Daniel Berrigan say, peacemaking begins with grief. Nonviolence means we see every human being on the planet as our very sister and brother. We going deeper and deeper every day into the truth of our common unity. And the older we get and the more we pursue and meditate and contemplate the beauty of creation that we're all one, we realize we're one with all the creatures and all of Mother Earth. We could never harm anyone. And so we're grieving because millions are suffering and dying needlessly around the world, large part because of our country. So we're people of grief, and we need to practice grief as a new discipline in the spiritual life these days. You have to take time every day to grieve. That's part of the life of nonviolence. Blessed are the meek, the gentle, the nonviolent. Thomas Merton said that word, meekness, is the biblical word for kingy and nonviolence. I kid you not, he said that. But Jesus is so weird. He's such a genius. He has incredible imagination. He says, the people of active, creative nonviolence like Gandhi and Dr. King, they will be one with the earth. They will inherit the earth, one with creation. And that only hit me about 15 years ago. And I thought, why is no one talking about it? Oh, because we totally rejected Jesus' nonviolence. We have the just war. We bomb and kill everybody for God, for Jesus. So we're not one with the earth. And we're not one with creation. Therefore, catastrophic climate change. hunger and thirst for social, economic, racial, gender, environmental justice. At the same time, be as infinitely merciful as you can be, especially to those in this culture that you're not supposed to be merciful to. And then on top of all of that, purity of heart. In other words, total inner nonviolence. And Jesus, again, the imagination. The deeper you can go into cultivating interior nonviolence, not beating yourself up, not being violent to yourself, we're going to let go of all the violence and hurts and wounds inside us. Give it all to God. Let God disarm our hearts. Only then, when we begin to cultivate a nonviolent heart, will we begin to see. And who will we see? God. We'll see every human being as our sister and brother, and then we'll see Christ in one another. And we'll see God everywhere. We'll be in the beatific vision all the time. You're looking at me like, this guy's got to cut back on the coffee. But no, it's true. And it all leads up to blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called the sons and daughters of God. It's such a brilliant, hopeful teaching. Because it says God is a peacemaker. God is total nonviolence, a God of infinite peace. Do you believe that? And your fundamental identity, forget everything the culture tells you from now on, that you're an American, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, whatever they're telling you. You are the beloved daughter of the God of the universe, the beloved son of the God of peace. That's who you are. We claim that as our identity, and we go into the culture of war, and we make peace. That's just what we do. And so we're going to get in trouble. It's not going to go over very well. No one wants to have peace. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the struggle for justice. And then when they insult you and call you every name in the book, now you're getting the good stuff. Rejoice and be glad. Because now you get to be like Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Dr. King, and you get to practice nonviolence. Isn't that great? What's the problem, folks? I could go on, and happily I did in the book. But just to point out the two antitheses that I like, there's 6. No, this doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. But not only that, we know no one in human history ever wrote down these words before. The 5th antithesis. Now, I hope you know your history, but Leo Tolstoy gave the last 25 years of his life to this sentence, the 5th antithesis. You have heard it said, but I say to you, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, and now memorize this with me, because Leo did. In the Greek, offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. That's it. No, that just changes everything. And Tolstoy finally got it. He wrote this mammoth book called The Kingdom of God is Within You. It was a complete bomb. His life's mission now was to convert the horrible Russian Orthodox Church, which is just a servant of the Tsar and the state, like the American churches just serve the Pentagon. I'm just saying. So he failed completely. And a year before he died, he gets this letter. Because the secretary, we know all about it because the secretary was sitting next to him when he opened it from some unknown guy in South Africa. Dear Mr. Tolstoy, I loved your book. I will give my whole life to teaching the world nonviolence. And went on and on. Mohandas K. Gandhi. And Tolstoy turned to his assistant and said, I can die in peace. This is going to be the greatest person in the world. And Tolstoy could see it already. It's amazing. So Gandhi read that sentence every morning and every evening. How do you do that, Gandhi's thinking? I'm not allowed, someone's going to do violence to me, I'm not allowed to do violence back. And Jesus does a Kingian workshop and says, if they strike you in the right cheek, turn the other cheek, and so forth. But Gandhi's saying, so the world says you can only respond with 2 things. You fight back with violence or you run away. And Jesus is saying you stand your ground and you engage your opponent, but you don't use the means of your opponent. You look the opponent in the eye and you say, hey, don't hurt me. We're brothers. What's the problem? Are you okay? Until as you appeal with love in your heart and the Spirit of God working through you to the truth of our common humanity, and the scales fall from his eyes and we reconcile and he disarms and you live happily ever after. That's the process, folks. And we are such trained experts in violence, we don't even know what that means now. So Martin Luther King would not allow anyone on his march unless they had made a 3-hour training in nonviolence. I'm taking a side because I went and made a holy pilgrimage by myself to Marquette Park this morning. I hope everyone in this room has been there, where Martin on August 1966 led the march and experienced more hate than all of Mississippi combined, he said, and was knocked flat to the ground by a brick in the head. When he left that day to go speak, and he's lucky survived because of the hate he experienced in Chicago. He was at the airport, and he was at the counter by himself. I'm getting off topic, and there was this tiny nun, all dressed up in black, who went up to him and said, "Are you Martin Luther King?" "Yes, sister." "Oh, I just love you so much and support you." And he turned and looked her in her eye, and he was so sad, nearly crying. He said, "Sister, promise me you'll always pray for me." It was Helen Prejean at O'Hare Airport. That's always very touched me. Dr. King says, you have to be trained in this sentence: offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. How are we doing that? We are offering violent resistance to everybody in the world and one another. We're experts at it. That's what we got to do. This is the heart of the gospel. And Gandhi discovered, perhaps for the first time in history, that he said, maybe Jesus didn't mean it just for individuals, which very few church people were saying. It's intended for nations and for the whole human race. And he proved it. And since the Gandhian revolution, we've had 85 nonviolent revolutions, and there are more grassroots movements of nonviolence now around the planet than ever before in history, all going back to his rediscovery. It's a very exciting time. The world is moving, you just don't hear about it in the U.S. And that's not even the climax. You have heard it said, love your countrymen and hate your enemies, but I say to you, love your enemies. It's not your neighbor across the street or your boss that you don't like. It's nation-state language. Remember that. You are to practice unconditional, active love to the people targeted for death by your nation-state. Let's think about who that means. The people of Vietnam, and El Salvador, and Nicaragua, and Guatemala, and Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. Where am I forgetting? Everybody on the planet? Venezuela, everywhere. So we're supposed to side with them and love them. That's the challenge of following Jesus. How have you been doing it? And if you're still alive, we got to figure out how to do it more than ever. And that's what I hope St. Giles and you Christian peacemakers in Chicago can be working on. But what's so spectacular on this, the most political sentence in the whole Bible, which is not just the end of war, it's the end of the nation-state system, because we love everybody. There, in the most political sentence, I submit, Jesus offers the clearest description of the nature of God. Why do we love our enemies? Didn't we just agree? Because you are the daughters and sons of the God who lets the sun rise on the good and the bad, and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Isn't that spectacular? God practices universal nonviolent love. God is a God of universal peace, and therefore God is universal nonviolence. Do you believe that? Do you want that? I think this is good news. And this is the God we're moving toward and getting to know and wanting to follow and be sons and daughters of. It's very exciting to me. So in the Matthew, then he goes on and he's clearly modeling and practicing everything he just taught. And then he's kind of teaching the disciples in Matthew. this isn't going to work really that well. You know, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. People aren't going to like you disrupting the culture, and some of you are going to lose your jobs, and the church will kick you out, and some of you are going to get arrested and killed, and now you get to be really nonviolent. It's fantastic. But one of the things I love so much, and there's so much to talk about Matthew, but he has that line in there, "Come to me, all you who are, tired and heavy laden. I will give you rest because I am gentle and nonviolent and humble of heart." There's not a trace of nonviolence and a trace of violence in Jesus. He's a totally nonviolent, gentle heart. I think you just touch Jesus and you're healed because there's not a drop of violence in him. Isn't that great? So that's what we have to kind of remember now about Jesus. But he's in your face political at the same time. And he's wanting to change the whole world. So one of the problems with Matthew, you get to that chapter where he's going, "You brood of vipers, you whitened sepulchres, you're like dead man's bones, you hypocrites." And we're reading and going, "Oh, now we're getting somewhere. This is our guy. Now no more of this hippie stuff. Let's get with some good." No, that's not what's happening. We are projecting our anger and violence onto Jesus, and we've been doing it for 1,700 years. Did you all know this great Buddhist Zen master? He was my close friend for 30 years through Daniel Bergen, Thich Nhat Hanh. You know him? So I would go and visit him, and he was always trying to encourage me and get me to cut back on the coffee and the pizza. He was really nice and really gentle, and you'd be with him, and I would go, and I was leading a campaign to close Los Alamos in New Mexico, where they build all the bombs. And I was prevented by the Archbishop from having public prayer services for peace. And it was headlined in the newspaper the next day: "Bishop bars priest from ever praying publicly for peace again." We were breaking all new ground. He has to. He said, "John, you're going to bring down the whole Archdiocese of New Mexico." And I laughed. That's the funniest thing I heard. And then I realized he's right. Because everybody building the nuclear bombs, you all saw Oppenheimer, the movie. There are 20,000 people, all of them Christian, most of them Catholic. The churches are packed. The priest blesses the bombs. And the church has been bought off since Oppenheimer showed up. And I kept going back, and he removed my faculties. He said, "You're not allowed to say Mass anymore because if you catch on, I won't get any more money." And he had this secret stash of $1 million, and we're the poorest diocese in the country, and the poorest state in the country, and the poorest county in the world around Los Alamos. But I digress. And so Thich Nhat Hanh would say, "Did you hear what I said? I rest my case." That's the way. I remember thinking, this is what Jesus must be like. And you look at the old footage of Gandhi, and he's like that too. I'm very bombastic, but Gandhi, you could barely hear. He was like mumbled. And Thich Nhat Hanh so many times would give a speech, and thousands would be there. Even if the microphone is here, you never heard a word he said. He would say to me, like, "Are you telling me that the people who build the bomb are Christians? Don't they know that goes completely against Jesus and the gospel and the kingdom of God? Don't they see that they're hypocrites and blasphemers and they're just possessed by the spirit of death?" He's not yelling. And the main thing to learn about Jesus when you read the Gospels is he's grieving. He's lamenting the whole time. There's no anger in him. The word anger is never used in the Gospel of Matthew except to forbid it, along with fear in the Sermon on the Mount. So I find that very hopeful and beautiful. And you know the story. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the same story. Jesus organizes the poor in a spirit of nonviolence, turns and marches to Jerusalem, goes into the temple where the religious authorities are working with the empire to get all their money, the poor people coming into Passover, and they have to pay out their life savings so he can kill a lamb to worship God, but you people are so horrible, you're going to have to pay extra, and especially some of you. And by the way, we don't take that evil Roman money, so we're going to have to change your evil Roman money into our holy money. That's going to cost you a little bit more. And Jesus doesn't yell, scream, hurt anybody, kill anybody, drop any nuclear bombs, but he just turns over the tables and says, no, we're not doing that anymore. From no more injustice. This is a house of prayer. It lasted about a minute. I've been arrested 85 times and done hundreds of civil disobedience actions and been in and out of court my whole life. And now I'm an ex-con and I can't vote and I can't travel to a lot of countries and the government monitors me and I have a serious recidivism problem. So we better not talk about it. But if you're going to do civil disobedience like that, you don't go in there screaming and yelling and be violent. You're more and more like Thich Nhat Hanh and Gandhi than ever. Every time I've been arrested or when Dr. King talked, you were so centered and peaceful and prayerful. Everywhere I go, people say, Truman said, well, Jesus was yelling and screaming and did violence in the temple so I could drop the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. That's crazy, and that's not what the story says. But if you're doing that, you're going to be arrested and tortured and killed. He's in the upper room, and Matthew makes it, because he's talking to the Jewish audience, this is the new covenant. Of what? Nonviolence. How? Because he says, you've heard this line before. My body broken for you, my blood shed for you. If he were a good Roman, if he were a good American, he should have said, I'm in charge. Go break their bodies for me. Go shed their blood for me. No, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. Do this. Dear friends, every time you go to Mass, you're participating in the new covenant of total nonviolence. It's the methodology of God. And we've been taught to ignore it. But you and I want to reclaim that. You don't like that? Let's go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible Roman soldiers. And what does St. Peter do? He's thinking, if there's ever a just war in all of human history, if violence is ever divinely sanctioned, if there's ever a moment to kill for God, in the name of God, to protect God, it's now. And he's right, I always say. And just as he goes to kill to protect our holy guy, the commandment comes down, put down the sword. The way I read that is, dear friends, those are the last words of Jesus to the church. The last thing the men and women around him together heard him say, according to the Synoptic Gospels, is put down the sword. And it's the first time they understood just how serious he is about this Sermon on the Mount, nonviolence. They suddenly realize he's not going to defend himself with violence, which means we don't get to defend ourselves with violence, and they all run away. Oh, it's so shocking. When I discovered, though, reading Luke, because there's all little twists on it, Luke gets even more dramatic, about the high priest's slave, and Peter cuts off the ear. But think about it. So, there's all these soldiers and Judas and the disciples, and some of the disciples clearly have swords. And so what's about to happen? A total massacre. The Roman soldiers were to have killed all the disciples and Jesus right there if they all struck with the sword. Jesus intervenes into a massacre about to happen. He heals the poor slave. By the way, Peter cuts the ear off a slave. This poor guy is an innocent, oppressed person caught up. That's why violence never works. And he saves and heals that guy, and then he saves the life of the chief priests and the other Roman soldiers who might have been killed by Peter and the gang. He saves Judas, and he saves all the disciples, and they all run away from our nonviolent Gandhi says it's the greatest expression of nonviolence in history. I don't know why we don't talk about this anymore. And maybe we're scared. I think things are so scary in the world. This is worth looking at. Anyway, I know it's practically 10 o'clock and I'm only at Matthew, but I'll just say this last word about Matthew. Matthew makes a big fuss about the legality of execution. And that makes total sense to me, because when you get arrested, they bring you back to court, then you go to this court, then you go to this court, then you have a hearing, then you got to meet the lawyer, and then you got to go here. He's with the Sanhedrin, then he's with Pilate, then he's with the chief priest, then maybe back to Pilate, then to Herod. Total insanity. There's no justice then or now, but his execution is meticulously legal. Just as planning the total vaporization of millions of human beings through nuclear weapons, and the existence of these fossil fuels now, what we know that they bring on climate change, is totally legal, as is executions in racism and poverty. But there's a scene in Matthew that doesn't appear elsewhere, where the religious authorities are kind of nervous about the gang, this movement. So they go back to Pilate and they have a confab, and he brings in the centurion and the soldiers, and they say, we're not sure about this. And he's going, you're right. So they send the centurion and the soldiers back to the tomb late Friday, after he's buried, dead and buried, and they put the guards in front of the stone, and they put the official Roman seal of empire on the stone. And it says in the Greek, we killed you, you're dead, now stay there. Resurrection is illegal. It's civil disobedience. Our guy breaks through, he's out and about, causing good trouble in an illegal underground grassroots. I didn't make this up. This is what the story says. It's fantastic. Resurrection means having nothing to do with death, which means having not a trace of violence in you, which means living in God's total nonviolence. So what we're doing as people of gospel nonviolence is getting ready for resurrection. Mark is completely different. It's the earliest one written. It's really short. There's no infancy narrative. There's no Sermon on the Mount. There's nothing. The word that's used over and over again 41 times is immediately. He got up and he went immediately over there and he was hanging out with those people he shouldn't have. Then he immediately went over there and he healed that person he shouldn't have. Then he went over there and he was hanging out with those uppity women and he shouldn't have been doing that. And then he went over and did this immediately. And I just conclude that Mark is a nonstop action thriller of total nonviolent resistance to the culture. So I'm going to say my thesis sentence in a sentence, I hope. The Gospel of Mark is a call to total, permanent, nonviolent resistance to empire and the entire culture of violence, injustice, and war every day for the rest of your life, as radical discipleship to the nonviolent Jesus, as obedience to the God of peace and universal love, as entrance into the kingdom of total nonviolence. Did you hear what I said? We have to be resisting according to Mark. It's very clear to me and to others who have written about Mark. I think it's fantastic. Well, I could go on. I'll just say about Mark, what is different with him is that there's no resurrection in Mark, you know? The women are totally faithful as disciples, and they get there that Sunday morning, and the stone is rolled away, and the angel's sitting there in white, smoking a cigarette, going, why are you looking for the living among the dead? What? He's not here, he's gone. But go and tell the gang that he's gone back to Galilee, and he'll meet you there. And they run away terrified, and that's the last word. 800 years later, the church officials added a whole bunch of other verses to clean it up, because you can't leave it like that. But what if Mark is at least as smart as us? I think it's genius writing. In other words, the Gospel of Mark is saying, if you want to meet this risen guy, you got to go back to the beginning of the story. And you got to go to your own Galilee and start your own journey of nonviolent resistance to Jerusalem. And along the way, you'll see the risen one. We get to Luke, and he's just gone even more spectacular, if that's possible. One of the things that I love so much, and maybe you've heard me talk about before, is my friend Henry Nouwen used to always write his books as the three movements of the spiritual life. And I was always trying to figure out one about nonviolence, and I found it. My question was, where did Jesus learn all this spectacular nonviolence? Luke makes it very clear. His mother. Mary never says a word in Matthew or Mark. And in John, she's got one sentence. Remember at Cana? Do whatever he tells you. It's a good sentence. It's a good sentence. To go down in history with that, that's pretty good. Luke has a whole thing. The three movements of nonviolence. Number one, Mary and the Annunciation as contemplative nonviolence. Mary is a contemplative at prayer, meditating with God, one with God, has an experience of God, is scared, and then confused, and then like, what? And then, hey, behold, I'm a servant of the God of peace. Whatever you want to do, I'll do, because that's who I am. She knows who she is. It's all about our identity, folks. This is how you practice peace and nonviolence and can sustain universal love and justice making. If you claim your identity as Mary did, well, that first movement of contemplative nonviolence leads immediately to the second movement, Mary and the Annunciation, Mary and the Visitation as active nonviolence, reaching out and loving and serving someone in need, in this case Elizabeth, who says, who am I that the mother should? Elizabeth doesn't know who she is. And what do these two great women do? They start talking about their experience of God. But that's what happens if you are in love and serving those in need. Wow, God is doing this. You wouldn't believe what God has done in my life. Well, God is doing this in my life. Well, blessed are you. No, blessed are you. No, blessed is everybody. They just going out of control. And that's what happens in active nonviolence, the consolation of God. But that always leads, if you are serving those in need, to the third movement of gospel nonviolence, Mary and the Magnificat as prophetic nonviolence. She surpasses Jeremiah and Luke. My soul magnifies the God of peace. I'm just wacky in love with God of peace because now I see He's doing all this stuff throughout all of history. His mercy, his active, creative nonviolence is from age to age. It'll never end. He's disarming the whole world. I can see it. The rulers are being thrown down from their thrones. I'm a little worried about her nonviolence. I thought you'd laugh at that, but maybe it's too late. No, it's revolution. And the rich will be sent away empty and the hungry filled with good things. And the lowly lifted up. From age to age, God is doing this. It's a total nonviolent revolution. Well, that's why he presents Jesus as the way he does. So only in Luke do we get Luke 4, where he goes into the synagogue, opens up the scroll to Isaiah 61, and reads the most amazing words that you've heard so many times. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. I've come to bring good news to the poor, vision to the blind, release to the captives, liberation to all the oppressed. And today I'm announcing the Jubilee year. And he rolls up the scroll, and the greatest line in history, today the scriptures are fulfilled. Friends, I think for Luke, that's Jesus's declaration, his announcement, not just of his candidacy for presidency, announcing the permanent, never-ending revolution of total nonviolence that continues to this day. The Jubilee year, it's like, in Leviticus, by the end of the year, we will get all the money in the entire planet. Everyone will give away all their money, and it will be redistributed equally to every human being on the whole planet so that every human being has adequate and good food, clean water, health care, jobs, education, housing, and dignity. So Bates, Bezos, Gates, whatever their names are, Trump, Biden, Obama, all the rich have to give away all their money by the end of the year. It's so far beyond communism, capitalism, socialism, or anything we understand. Well, that's really, in the end, why they want to kill him, because it's upsetting the status quo. And everything Luke does comes from that vision of nonviolent revolution I propose. We have the Sermon on the plain, but to me, what's so spectacular with Luke is Luke 10. It's amazing. Jesus gathers 72 disciples and sends them out in pairs, just like a classic labor movement organizer. Go, I'm sending you on your way to be as gentle as lambs into the midst of wolves. That's his description of us. A little tiny lamb surrounded by 30 hungry wolves. That's an image of your life from now on in Chicago. How's that going for you? Isn't that exciting? You get to be really nonviolent. Yeah. And you're to heal every person who's a victim of violence, which means everybody on the planet. You're to expel all the demons of violence like we're possessed with the NRA or the Republican Party or America or the flag or some war. And you're to announce that the reign of God is at hand, a new world without any war or killing or hunger and injustice ever again. And what's so amazing is the 72 come back, and it says very clearly, they came back rejoicing. And Jesus says, see, I've given you power. No harm's going to come to you. This is going to work. I saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky. Satan is always code language for the empire. When the grassroots movements of nonviolence start, the empire and the culture of death are finished. If you see like Jesus does, when Rosa Parks refused her to get up, segregation fell. When the Berrigans walked into Catonsville and burned draft files with homemade napalm, the war was coming to an end. Do you see? That's what Jesus is saying. And it says, so don't rejoice because you got power over the demonic spirits of violence. Rejoice because your name is written in heaven. So they rejoiced. Then he rejoiced and turned in prayer to God. Your joy, they're going back and forth. It's never happened before. Friends, it's the only time in the four Gospels the poor guy is happy. I kid you not. It's the only time he rejoices. So when you're having a bad day, why do they rejoice? Why does he rejoice? Because they did what he wanted them to do, which is build a grassroots people power movement of nonviolence and healing and the enunciation of peace to one another. That's what he wants us to do. And he rejoiced. So when you're having a bad day and you can't take it anymore and you want to give up because you're not making any difference, just keep it doing it anyway, working for peace and justice, just to make the poor guy happy. I could go on, but I know it's 10:30, so... it's all so spectacular. He approaches Jerusalem and breaks down sobbing. Only in Luke, if they had only known the things that made for peace. You and I want to be the people who learn the things that make for peace. And that's what we're going to do for the rest of our life and figure out a way to go out into Chicago and announce peace, proclaim peace, and help create a more peaceful, nonviolent Chicago and support the peace movement everywhere. And in Luke, he goes to the cross, even forgiving those who kill him. He appears to the disciples on Emmaus, and they're so dejected. And he says, don't you see? God's nonviolence is working from Moses through the prophets to Francis and Claire and the abolitionists and the suffragists and the civil rights movement and all these great movements now. This is where the action is. And they get full of hope. And they recognize him in the breaking of bread. And they turn back to the scene of the crime. And they're now on the road to hope. That's what Jesus does to us. Luke has Jesus, in effect, doing a Bible study with us. And he says, from now on, you're my witnesses. A big word for Luke. A witness is someone who stands trial. I've been a witness many times. And you say, this is what I saw. Active nonviolence working. And that's what we do. We go forth as witnesses of peace in the world. And our message is, no more killing. We don't kill anyone anymore. Our bottom line is, there is no cause, however noble, for which we'll ever support the taking of a single life ever again. We don't kill people who kill people to show that you shouldn't kill people. We don't bomb people who bomb people to try to stop the bombing of people. We give our lives to stop the killing everywhere and anywhere so we can begin to create a new culture of peace and love. And that's what you're doing as peacemakers. And that's what I think Jesus wants us to do. When I think of resurrection, I love that line from Edna St. Vincent Millay, you know her poem, the great poet. I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. That's what I learned in writing about the gospel of peace and what I think nonviolence means. And that's my hope for all of us, that we could go forward and really, more than ever, be practitioners of creative nonviolence and practice contemplative, active, prophetic nonviolence and do our bit to welcome God's reign of peace. Thanks so much for listening to me, you all. You've been very sweet. Thank you. Well, I went on way too long. Sorry, I got carried away. I was looking for the water. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Wow. We're so glad you came.
I have 25 pages. That was only 3.
Okay. Well, how about
But happily, there's a whole book.
how about if we have some questions and answers?
Yeah, let's do it.
So if you have a question, I'll come around with a microphone. Just stand up or raise your hand. Anybody have a question?
You can ask me anything or say anything. We're all very nonviolent here. Who's going to start us off? Don't be afraid. Okay,
Right.
gentlemen.
Okay, John.
This is sort of a simple one maybe, but how do you practice nonviolence and stand up for Ukrainians and freedom in the world?
Oh, yeah. How do you practice nonviolence and stand up for Ukrainians and freedom in the world? Nonviolently. What I'm trying to say, what Jesus says, and Gandhi and King and Dorothy Day, is that war doesn't work. Violence in response to violence always leads to further violence. War in response to war always sows the seeds for further wars. There's a massive movement of nonviolence. It's called like the Ukrainian movement of nonviolence. It has a stupid, simple name like that. And the young kid, the head of it, was on Democracy Now! When the war began. And he's saying, like I've heard in war zones all over the world, Tutu told me he heard it in Rwanda 4 weeks after the massacre ended. Don't send us guns. Don't arm us. We got that already. Send us food, medicine, fund nonviolent conflict resolution. Wherever the U.S. and other nations have done that, it has worked. I happened to be living in Northern Ireland in 1997. I didn't know we were going to have the Good Friday peace agreement, but I saw it with my own eyes, and I ended up meeting with Jerry Adams and the IRA and talking with them about nonviolence. But if you're giving them a lot of money, both sides, England, the U.S., to end the war and dialogue and create a new nonviolent culture, they'll do it. But we always go to war because there's a lot of money to be made by killing children. Yes, that's what's going on. Because if you need to have a war, and you need enemies, and you got to stir people up every couple of months, and you got to say, we need these weapons, and we've been building these millions of bombs, and so we need to use them so we can keep building more. And it's like this country just serves the weapons manufacturers and the oil industry. But it's deeper than that. When Pope Francis, the week the war started, boy, was he criticized because he did not come out immediately and condemn Putin. Right, as I didn't. But we don't support Putin. If you're reading this, if you know what's going on in the world, and you'll never find it in the newspapers, you have to go listen to peace movement people all over the world, as I've done actually physically. You find out that the United States has been planning this war for 25 years through NATO, which violated all its own accords and has been egging and pushing Putin on. Francis said that the first week and got really criticized for it. And it's so brilliant for the war makers. They have gotten rid of so many peace treaties that so many of us worked for 50 years. We're closer to nuclear war than ever. It's exactly what the Pentagon wants. And the same with Israel and Gaza. It's exactly what they want. The same with the wars in Africa, and the same with the nuclear weapons industry. Now, I can say all of this to you because I was sitting in my hermitage writing Mark 13 the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. Who the heck cares about Mark 13? I call it Jesus' eschatological sermon on eschatological nonviolence in a time of apocalyptic violence. It's not working, Marcy. Anyway, it's incredible. He's just done the civil disobedience. Now, if you're hanging there with me, we know Mark is written just before the Romans came in the year 70, and we know Rome was totally destroyed. Everybody admits that. The Roman historians said that. You all know that, right? But there were hundreds of little revolutionary groups, the Zealots, like Hamas and FMLN and FSLN and Shining Path and every revolutionary violent group you can think of in history. They're all running around killing Roman soldiers. And Jesus is looking at them and saying, look, if you keep this up and reject my alternative of nonviolence, you're going to be totally destroyed and there won't be a stone left on stone. Matthew and Luke are written 2, 3, 4, 5 years after the destruction. So it's written in the past. It's already happened. But Mark is clearly, all the scholars say, before it. So it's like Martin Luther King the night before he was killed by the government, saying the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence. It's nonviolence or non-existence. Those are Martin Luther King's last words. Okay, Mark paints Jesus, this is an answer to your question, that I was studying the day of the war. He's sitting on the top of the Mount of Olives, looking over the city. Luke paints him as breaking down, weeping there. Mark has him looking at it. And he turns to the disciples and he says, keep watch. Keep watch. Keep watch. I think 7 times. And then at the end he says, what I say to you, I say to all. Keep watch. If you are like me and follow me in my total nonviolence, I'm going, yeah, everybody is going to hate you and want to kill you. But be faithful and keep watch with me. We have nothing to do with violence on any side. He doesn't side with Rome, the soldiers, the Roman death squads, Pilate, Herod, the religious authorities, the chief priests, or the zealots, or any of the violent groups. He calls them the wicked. He's totally, it's a call for nonviolent non-alignment. And then I remembered my friend Thich Nhat Hanh. You read his beautiful books and you go, that's so sweet. But no, he knew 1,000 monks by name who were killed by American bombs in the Vietnam War. For those of you who are priests and nuns, can you imagine knowing 1,000 other priests and nuns have been killed? He should have been crazy. He was hated by South Vietnam and hated by North Vietnam and hated by American, and everybody wanted to kill him. And so he ended up in exile in France for the rest of his life. I thought he was a contemplative keeping watch with nonviolent Jesus. Does that make sense? It's a very hard position to take. Dorothy Day took it, Merton took it, and you get raised by the Berrigans like I did, and you just have nothing to do with war. I'll tell you one other story about it. Now, I'm trying in my own way to answer your question about Ukraine. I'm not talking about passivity. I'm talking about funding grassroots nonviolent movements and supporting them. War doesn't work. And if you're going to say, well, what about Hitler? Study where nonviolent resistance was used against the Nazis. Denmark, Norway, and Bulgaria. Where it was tried, it worked. That's what the history books say. It's just that there's much more at stake in getting war. Anyway, I was living in El Salvador in 1985, and I'll end with this, Marcy, and you can call somebody else. And they sent me, the Jesuits at the UCA, at the height of the war, to work in a refugee camp. And it was near Wasapa, if you know El Salvador. And my sole job was when the death squads came in, I was the one to go out and greet them. Because I was a goofy young American kid with long blonde hair. And the Jesuits were like, let's hope they kill you. Thanks. And you'd go out and hear these guys with machine guns. And I was like, hi, how you doing? Can I help you? You need anything? Want some coffee? And that was my whole strategy of nonviolence, to look like a dumb American, which I can do easily, as you see. And they would just walk away like, well, you can't deal with this guy. He's nuts. And you know those 6 Jesuits were later brutally assassinated in 1989, my friends. That first night I had dinner with them, we were in their house, and their whole house was covered with bullet holes. This is 1985. Ea Correa, the president, had written all the pastoral letters for Romero, and Sobrino had written his sermons, and they had been bombed 28 times up until I met them in 85. And one of them says to me, "So John, we are against the junta, the 14 families that ruled El Salvador, 5 million people, who are just total unjust and fascist. And therefore we're against the whole government, and we're against its military and its armies and its death squads and its paramilitaries." Okay? And we're against the U.S. military aid, which is funding all of this and shipping weapons illegally and providing the bombers and the bombs and the helicopters. Okay? And we're against the FMLN and all the rebel groups that are trying to kill the death squads. Okay? But we're really against the violence of poverty and disease that is killing all our people. John, we are against violence on all sides, and everyone hates us and wants to kill us, and this is what it means to be a Christian. Are there any questions? Nonviolent, non-alignment. I think that's what Jesus called us to. Can we dare do it? I think war doesn't work. I think this is total insanity. And Francis said it just the other day too. But we're so blinded by our violence. That's what I preached about yesterday at St. Sabinus. We can't even imagine a nonviolent alternative. But war doesn't work. We're being brainwashed to do this. And if you're going to follow this guy, we say no, and we're going to have to do the hard work of figuring out nonviolent alternatives. We can alternate men and women, perhaps, Marcy, if that's okay. Is there a woman here who has a question? No, seriously, I think that'd be good. We don't have to, but I see 4 men with their hands up.
Oh, okay.
Way over there.
Way over here. All right, I'm coming. Excuse me.
I don't have a question, I'm sorry. But I'm just so struck with your early comments that you made about the difficulty of not being violent to each other in a community, in a family, that it's so easy to say nasty things, to make judgments, and how hard that is to stop. And I claim I don't, and I need to. So I know I'm not going to go and do major work in the inner city with violence to blacks and whites or poor or whatever. But I do make the commitment to you that I am going to be as nonviolent as I can to the people around me and to my family and to my neighbors. And I do love Trump. I will never vote for that man, but I believe and offer him love and all of the people who are trying to make a mess out of this country. So thank you.
Thank you. What's your name?
Anne?
Anne, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you. It's so beautiful and very, very helpful. Yeah, as Phil Bergen said, we would love Trump by praying for him and resisting him. That's what listening.
Father, I'm not going to change my sex.
May I just
I'm not a
say
girl.
another word? Can I just say a word to our friend? Is that okay? Sure. Could I? Because Anne, can I respond to you? Is it Anne? Yeah. Just hang in there. I've been trying to figure this out for my whole life, and I wrote this book, Anne, called The Nonviolent Life. And I think, my proposal, which I didn't say, I don't think, is that nonviolence requires 3 simultaneous attributes. And I invite you to think about this, Anne. We have to do 3 at the same time, and that's the catch. If we want to reach the heights, let's say, of Gandhi, Dorothy Day, and Dr. King, not to mention Jesus. Number 1, totally nonviolent to ourselves. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Now, that's why Thomas Merton said on his way to Asia to my friend David Stendhal-Ross, the only way to survive being Catholic and Christian in the United States is to start practicing a little Buddhism. And he meant by that the present moment infinite compassion to everybody, mindfulness, because we're forgetting that in Christianity and in the Catholic Church. So, I mean, non-cooperating with your violence. I love Thich Nhat Hanh always to say, just look deeply within. Why did you do that? Why did you want to run somebody over as you left Mass? It was so nice. You had communion, but you had to run over that guy. Okay, but you're not going to beat yourself up. And then you realize it's because 2 weeks ago somebody put you down and you never dealt with it. You never surrendered that to God. The trick, the practice, which is every minute now for the rest of your life, Ann, is surrender, surrender, surrender. Everything. Every trace of violence, anger, hatred, bitterness, wound, whatever is going on, whatever memory, give it to God, give it to God, give it to God. Say, you take it, and I'm going to do your will now, not mine. I actually, in the middle of this, wrote a whole book on that. That's what I learned, and it's going to come out next, called Surrendering to the God of Peace. At the same time, meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being on the planet and the creatures and Mother Earth. So think about the 1, 2, or 3 people who really push your buttons, whether a relative, a church friend, or co-worker to Trump or Biden, whoever. And you realize they're your teacher of nonviolence because they're actually exposing your violence. And then you learned about serious prayer for them. You're interceding for people all day long and wishing them the best and the wisdom and nonviolence. That's how it works. And that's all said. At the same time, you have to have one foot involved in the movement. And I just really invite you to say that because Jesus is very clear. The commandment is follow me. And he's going ahead of us to Jerusalem. Now, so I say just pick a cause and get involved. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And together, if we all do our little something, there can be a tipping point like Rosa Parks. That's how God works in the world. God's up there doing her big thing. We need to be down here doing our movement thing. Now, the reason, the danger in this is some of us only work at our inner peace. That is not following Jesus. Tutu would say, you're the problem. Your silence is complicity with nuclear weapons and the destruction of the planet. The flip side of us is some of us are just total activists, the myth being the 60s students, so angry and yelling and horrible to themselves and the people around them. That doesn't sustain you for the long haul of nonviolence. So this is what Gandhi and Dr. King are talking about, kind of a holistic nonviolence. Mull on that, Ann, thanks. Yeah. And thank you for sharing again.
I really just wanted to thank you for coming and speaking the words of the Prince of Peace for everyone. We often do not hear many homilies about peace, and we used to pray to St. Michael to defend us in battle at the end of every Mass, but that's long gone. Now I have a couple questions.
That's progress.
Yeah. One is
St. Michael.
One is lighthearted, and I'll say it to you first. I understand you started in the Society of Jesus, and I talked to Father Dennis Berrigan a couple years ago.
Daniel
he told
Berrigan.
me that he wanted to return to the Jesuit community and die a good Jesuit.
Dan said that.
Right? He actually said that. Uh-huh. Okay. I thought maybe you might get an idea, go back to the Jesuits or something.
Oh, I'll be happy to talk about that.
Oh, I see. Anyway, what do you think about, it's a shibboleth, but
Who?
the term, it's a fancy word. It's a common saying. Okay. What do you think about the expression peace through strength?
I'm all for everything as long as it's nonviolent. So someone says, so you don't believe in self-defense? No, I don't believe in violent self-defense. I believe in nonviolent self-defense. I believe in nonviolent peace, nonviolent strength, nonviolent power, nonviolent God, nonviolent church, nonviolent human race. And I think God is calling all of creation to be nonviolent. You see that in the famous oracle of Isaiah 11, which is so beautiful. The lion and the lamb and the child, and no harm and no death on all my holy mountain. That's where we're headed. So, of course, that slogan is just another way to brainwash us in the Orwellian sense to support killing children, which is what we do. But a more serious, so don't believe any of these slogans. And I just can't stress enough just to read the Gospels for the next 30 years only and report back to me. Until you really get this nonviolence of Jesus. And you were mentioning the church. You never heard about this in the church. You'll forgive me for being a broken record and a promoter, but that's why I'm doing the work I'm doing. You cannot publish a book in the United States with the word nonviolence in the title. I know that. I used to have a lifetime contract with Random House. They said, we're not doing that. And no publisher will do that. So I've written a commentary on nonviolence. The priests and the ministers in the United States are not just not being taught nonviolence, they're not being taught the Gospels anymore. Now, I could give you chapter and verse about that. There was a shift around 2000 that they were the seminarians are to memorize the catechism and canon law. The head of the Catholic Bishops' Conference told me that. So there's something that is really happening. In other words, the Holy Spirit, I was told, the thinking is, there's reason for the predicament we're in. The Holy Spirit has moved on from the Gospels. Isn't that a relief? So you don't have to know about that's why young priests don't know anything about it. So that's why I'm asking you, everyone, to buy a book for your priest or minister or somewhere. Seriously, to educate them. It is when the people start educating their priests that's the only way change is going to happen in the United States. I've been doing a lot of work in the Vatican, and a lot is happening around the rest of the world, but everyone is appalled by the church in the United States, around the world. And so I'm inviting us on this tour to use my book and whatever else you can to educate not just other parishioners, but your ministers, I don't know if that's helpful. Oh, the Jesuits. Well, so, I entered the Jesuits. I was a Jesuit for 32 years, and every single year I got called in and said, because I was working for peace 24/7. Where did I go wrong? Well, anyway, and I was being told, you should leave. You're not following Ignatius.
All right.
So eventually, I was in so much trouble. I was banned by probably 35 dioceses from talking about Jesus like I am. But the bans now, the bishops, this is in the 2000s, because when the Iraq War happened, I was traveling every day like I am now. So they started complaining to Pope Benedict, and that got real serious. And then when the Archbishop of New Mexico told me nuclear weapons are our only hope and God can no longer protect us, so you have to support war and nuclear weapons to follow Jesus. He said that to my face, and he removed my faculties. That's when the Jesuits moved me to Baltimore and removed my faculties, and I was put under house arrest in the Society of Jesus, like they used to do to Jesuits in the 1600s. I was treated far worse than the pedophile priests, and I was told, I had final vows in the order. I was like, Dan, I'm crazy about the Jesuit. Still am. I never will recover, so pray for me. And they said, you will leave after 5 years, so please do us a favor and just leave now. It was awful, and I started to have a breakdown, so I left. And I was going to, Thich Nhat Hanh said he was going to buy me a house in France, and he himself was going to find the finest case of French wine, and he didn't drink, but have it waiting for me. That was a nice offer. And then I went to see Tutu, and I'm in so much trouble in South Africa, and Tutu catered a dinner party in my honor. It was amazing. And then while I was with Tutu, I got an email from this bishop I'd never heard of in California saying, you have to stay a priest. You come here, move here to Big Sur, I'll get your house, you can do whatever you want, you can have a parish, you can work for peace and justice, but please stay, I will take care of you for the rest of your life. Well, I thought that was God, so I did, and I eventually moved to California, and the month after I arrived, the beautiful bishop dropped dead. God. So now then the pandemic hit, and a year later, a kind of right-wing bishop came in, And after a couple of months, I met him. I liked him. He liked me, but he was getting information. And he wrote me a letter during the pandemic. Dear John, well, clearly you're a busy guy. And we have a lot of priests. We really don't need any more. So good luck, and take care, and don't ever write or call me again. So I'm in this kind of limbo. I'm being honest, but don't tell this to the press. So I'm a priest in good standing now with faculties, and I say Mass in parishes. But I don't know what's going to happen because I'm the last one in the country like that. And yet I'm writing for Pope Francis, and which is really annoying to some of these bishops in the U.S. about me even more. So pray for me. And now I'm out even more public than ever. But it's very exciting. Go ahead, Marcy.
All right. I know
We have one more time.
There's three people who are just really aching to say a question. But I'm going to ask you non-violently and with love in my heart that perhaps the responses can be maybe a little more streamlined.
You want them to have shorter questions.
Sure. Okay.
They want me to stay to midnight, don't you always? We're having a good time. Okay, I hear the point.
Father,
I'll shut up.
maybe you could help us to understand.
Okay, real slow.
Could you help us to understand John 10:34, not peace but sword?
Yeah.
Do you want to read them?
Read it.
A couple of verses. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother.
Yeah, okay, we can stop there. So that's not John. That's Matthew's version you're reading? Which is Matthew?
Yeah,
Matthew. It never made sense to me until two things. I was living in New Mexico, and I had 4 parishes, incredibly poor, but then this one wealthy small parish near a ski resort of retired military families from Texas. And the whole front row, 25 family members, their son was leading the bombings over Baghdad. It's like just my luck, and I was their pastor. So I was speaking out against the war, and then I was really speaking out against the war, and then just before the war started in January 2003, it started on March 19th, 2003. Are you with me on this chronology? There was the National March in Washington, D.C., and I was invited to be a keynote speaker with Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, the 3 of us. And I spoke to 300,000 people, and I didn't tell them that I was going to be away that weekend. I had another Jesuit there. But I was the lead story on ABC News, so they all found out. The whole parish went to the Archbishop, and he had me kicked out for speaking out against the war. And the argument was, you've divided us. And my response was, you've never been so united in your lives. And I understood Jesus and Martin Luther King for the first time. You go and study Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. It's incredible. The white minister's writing to him saying, you're dividing us. And his letter says, you're the most segregated city in the world. You're doing that. You're outdo South Africa. The whole city is divided. And you're telling me I'm dividing you. No. How does Martin think this stuff up? I have come to unite you like a doctor who lances the boil on the body politic. This guy is so great. And originally, at first, there'll be pus and ooze and it's mess, but then the healing can begin. No, I'm exposing your latent violence, and that's how peace will come. Of course, Jesus has come to bring peace. In Luke, when he's born, the whole of heaven opens up and says, peace has come on earth. I mean, what more can this guy do to embody peace, teach peace, breathe peace? And he says, in a world of insanity, where everyone is addicted to violence and war, every one of us, we go right along. It's very hard to give our lives without weapons and to go against the whole world. And Merton wrote this brilliantly. In a world of insane imperial violence, a person of total nonviolence looks divisive and crazy, and he's disrupting everything. So Jesus walks into a room and people want to kill him. I've had that experience too. Your just very presence is divisive. That's what Martin Luther King taught in explaining the life of Jesus. And so some translations in the Greek say, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword, or I came to bring division. You see what he's saying. I'm not going to allow this to continue. I'm going to speak up, and I'm disrupting the culture that's killing people, even if I have to turn over tables. He's nothing passive about this guy, and yet he's the gentlest person who ever lived. Now we're getting somewhere. I find this very exciting and refreshing. He's the fullest expression of a human being, totally nonviolent in an inhuman world of total violence. And the challenges, and what's so sad about the Catholic churches and the priests is we're taught, you don't divide people. Don't say anything to upset anybody. And so every church I've gone to in Chicago, even though Cardinal Cupich sent out a press release to everybody, come and hear me, he just kind of saying yes to everybody, won't say anything to turn off anybody. That's not Jesus. You have to take a stand and say no to the war on Gaza, no to the war in Ukraine, and no to nuclear weapons and racism and gun violence and sexism and poverty and catastrophic climate change. And that's going to upset people. And now we're going to be nonviolent. That's why he's trained us. I'm sending you as lambs into the midst of wolves. If everybody's a wolf and you're a total lamb, it's not going to go over. It's not going to be a happy ending, at least at first. Things like that. I just feel like I have to go on for another half hour.
Okay, all right.
Give me some Valium or something. Okay, what's your name?
Hi, John. Kathy. I am conflicted about two things.
Okay.
Inspired, and this has been a great evening, but maybe you can help me. I am conflicted about now, after hearing you, even voting in the upcoming presidential election.
Yeah.
I won't vote in the primary because I declared myself an independent a few years ago because there was so much wrong with so many things. So if I vote for Joe Biden, who is likely the Democratic, there'll probably be two, there may be more candidates, but if you look at my record, I've probably voted for more people who have lost than have ever won. And somehow that's not empowering to me. You know, I want to support someone who will do some good and has some good policies, but there's no one candidate that I see will be available to vote for. And so do I not vote? Is that the nonviolent thing to do? And then the second thing is, do I not pay all of my taxes? Because a lot of it funds the military and the money they spend buying bombs and things like that. It's really a sincere question, and I don't know what to do.
Was there another question out there somewhere? Of course, we're all going through that. So a couple of thoughts. First, everything you say, you take to Jesus. Now, I cannot stress that enough. Like, that's what I do. I have a kindergarten level prayer. You know, I begin with an hour meditation. I'm sitting with Jesus, and we're done. Our will. Whatever we're doing is not working, and our own personal lives aren't working. And we're getting older, so we're just going to serve this great person of peace and nonviolence. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do here, there, that, this, then? That's the first thing. And that's my message to all of you. But keep in mind the Gandhian hermeneutic of nonviolence. It's very helpful. And I think, you turn off the TV and you turn away the newspapers. And this is you reading the gospel and living the gospel, and your whole day-to-day is with those in need and with the movement. Oh my God, the things Michael Flager was telling me yesterday he's trying to do. It was just incredible to me, the energy and effort. And I've tried to do many, many things, and then I get presidents calling me to give them a retreat on peace. Jimmy Carter did that. And the only person who claims to have all my books and reads them and studies them is Bill Clinton. And driving Hillary crazy. This was 15 years ago. I don't know. I used to disrupt him all the time. And all I'm saying is we're not putting our energy there. We're putting our energy in the gospel and building a global grassroots movement of total nonviolence for justice, creation, and peace, the likes of which the world has never seen. We need to build a grassroots movement and reclaim political willpower to stop the use of fossil fuels from destroying the planet. And it's probably too late, but we got to keep trying. And to end all these wars and end nuclear weapons and spend all that money instead on all the poor at home and abroad. We don't have time to be obsessed with all of this stuff. And it's all bad. And Obama spent more on war than anybody, actually. So, I never had the time of day for him. And actually, we had a lot of mutual friends. We don't have time for that. But you be raised by the Berrigans. Because Dan used to say, I would rather be in Clinton's jails than in his company. So Dan never voted in all his life. And Dorothy Day never voted in all her life. And she was tortured in the last group of women to get women the right to vote. And I understand what she was doing. I'm not telling you what to do, except to go and ask Jesus. I'm saying, I don't have time for any of this nonsense, because the empire's insane. They're on track, whoever is going, with their media to destroy the world. And we have only so much time left, and we've got this guy. And we're going to follow this gospel, not the gospel of America, which is saying, hey, folks, we better be Trump. We're moving into fascism now no matter what. Everything is changing so fast. But you could go to lots of good Catholic groups like Network, and they can give you some serious good advice about voting if you really want to do that. I think, as Dan would say, you're voting 24/7 for the gospel of peace and justice. And I don't say that lightly. But if you get the book and read it, it's very clear that Dorothy Day changed our whole understanding of Jesus. For the first time in 2,000 years, because in the Synoptics, they were trying to get the poor guy. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? Well, let me see a coin. If you carried a coin, it had Caesar's face on it, and Caesar claimed to be God, so it was idolatry. Jesus has no coins, and he's exposing them for violating their own law. And they show him, he says, Caesar, and he says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's. And only for 2,000 years, we said, oh, well, we got to pay our taxes. And Dorothy says, once you give to God what is God's, there's nothing left for Caesar. That's how obvious. We don't give a single penny to Caesar. Now, Dorothy's methodology is mine and Dan's. Simple lifestyle. Get under the tax line. Give away your money. Live simply. You don't need it, and you can't take it with you anyway. There's a lot of good you can do with it. And you're happier that way anyway. So, yeah, if you want to study serious war-tax resistance, go to warresisters.org. The War Resisters League has put out an incredible handbook with every question. They've interviewed everybody who's done it in the country. Some people get ignored, others lose their houses, but a lot of us just try to stay really below the tax line. Marcy.
Okay, Rio, one more.
Okay, and then the guy is done. That's it. Okay, go ahead. Me, I mean. Go ahead. Well, it's been a nice evening. Thank you all very much then.
Very short. I think that the words we use to deal with nonviolence, like fighting or standing up, all these words are very similar to what the people who believe in war use. We
Thank you so much. Yeah. So you're calling me and everyone to nonviolent communication. There's great programs in that. And of course, that's at the heart of Buddhism, is nonviolent language. And I could hear Thich Nhat Hanh speaking that way. I'm not that totally enamored with it. I agree with you. I shouldn't use the word fight. But I tell you, and I've really studied Gandhi and King. And Gandhi says nonviolence is very close to violence. The only difference is we don't kill people. But you are totally willing to give your life. This is postdoc. No, Mahatma Gandhi is talking about Jesus saying, take up your cross. You're going to give your life for suffering humanity. It's very much like going to the army. And so what part of the problem with talking about, all our language is so inept and not very good, is that it waters it down. So Martin Luther King used to talk about militant nonviolence. And you see what he's getting at. And so, but it's a fair enough question. As long as we're not passive, as long as we're active and daring, I think that's the best. Hey, thanks so much for listening. I'll be in the back signing books. I really enjoyed it. Sorry I went on so long. God bless you. Be well. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And I know there are some people who are wondering about being able to pay for a book electronically. I have a Square on my phone, and so I'll be back there if you want to buy a book with a credit card. Thank you for coming. Thank you.